Hello, welcome back to ViolinCello podcast. This is Ned, and that is,
David Kaplan here.
he's a good man. So today we thought we would talk about spontaneity in music, everything about it. How to be, first of all, what it is. That's kind of a big word, at least for me. And what it looks like and how to achieve it. And before that, I kind of wanted to tell a quick story, kind of piggybacking off what we talked about last time. And last time we actually talked about our favorite composers. And David mentioned someone that's composing right now, a fabulous composer named Jesse Montgomery. And as he talked about that, it really got me thinking. He talked about that it's basically bridging cultural gaps and connecting all sorts of different people groups, the kind of stuff that she does. And anyway, recently I played Voodoo Dolls, which is a piece by her with my quartet. And speaking of spontaneity in music, okay, this piece, it has many bars for every part. It's unnotated, and it's freestyle. So it's sort of a rock and roll style, and you just do anything that you want for this amount of bars. Okay, so my part came up for like, okay, I have 16 bars, and it's just everyone's just doing the riff, duka duka duka, whatever, and I'm doing whatever I want, and I just totally, I like go to this other place, yeah, which is what you want to do theoretically, right, in music. Like I just lost, I felt nothing, I knew nothing. I was like in a different, uh I was like using the force, or something like outside. And so I was just going to town, doing different things, just whatever, going all. And I started to get this like feeling that everything was great, amazing, but then I just started to get this like feeling that, like, you know, as musicians, we all understand this feeling, and it's a feeling that something's not right, and that usually means that something's like really not right. Like something's not together, basically, right? Like, so, I started looking around at the other players. I'm like, what? Like trying to, basically, I was totally lost. I was still going to town and blah blah blah. And I started like recognizing what they were playing. And long story short, like I'm like, whoa, like I'm like behind like 20 bars, right? Like I missed my like, so I went 20 bars too long, and the recording's like online and everything. But I got so carried away that I went like 20 bars too long. And but I play with like great play, like nobody knew this happened. Like I play with really great musicians. And literally I was like looking around like you're panicking when that happens, right? You're like you have to find where you are. So you're like, where am, like you have to get back together. Like, so there's you're panicking. But I didn't show anything outside, everything was, you can see it on the recording. uh no one bats an eye. Like I look around, like at the cello, the first violin, nobody even bats an eye. They just play. No one, after the concert, no one said a thing. They're like, yeah, great, that was great fun. uh anyway, that's my story. But there's a couple takeaways there. One is that, well, there's always a limit to being spontaneous, I guess. That's the obvious takeaway because you can't just do whatever. You still have to do what the composer asks. So you have certain limitations. I guess that's the obvious. But the other takeaway is that I just went for it. I got lost, whatever. Big mistake. One of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in performance. But no one even knew that it happened. Like nobody. I still don't know if my quartet knows it happened for sure. Because we didn't, we never talked about it with them. So, so sometimes when you go for something, even when you feel like, wow, that was terrible, like I'm way out of my comfort zone, sometimes it was actually like not that bad. So, like when you're taking risks, like even I make such a bad mistake for 20 bars, I'm doing like something totally different. But in the end, it really uh, turned out okay, I think. So shout out to Jesse Montgomery. Really great piece. So anyway, spontaneity in music.
Yeah,
So first of all, what is it? What is it, David?
well, I just wanted to touch on something that you mentioned in your story, which is, and if I can rephrase it a little, that something along the lines of discipline makes freedom, and kind of knowing what the rules are so that we can break them. And so we kind of need to know what we're doing in order to have spontaneity, or spontaneity with purpose and meaning, and not just spontaneity on accident. Um, and uh, and so I'll just tell a quick little anecdote about my time playing at farmers markets, kind of segueing into what I think spontaneity is and how to achieve it. Um, and so for about 7 years, every summer, a violinist friend of mine and I would play at um, local farmers markets, the Evanston and Skokie Farmers Market, and a couple other ones. And we had this kind of set list of maybe an hour and 20 minutes of uh, like pretty famous classical tunes, something that everybody recognizes and everybody loves, given the setting that it's a farmer's market, right? Um, and so after 7 years of doing that, I mean, even after a few weeks of doing that, you start to kind of get the pieces in your head and kind of unofficially memorize them. They're all pretty short and recognizable and fun, and it's a low pressure situation. If you make a mistake, people are just walking by doing their business, buying fruits and things like that. So super low pressure setting, perfect for experimentation. And so after a while of getting to do this, we knew the music by heart, and uh, you know, when we would take repeats, uh, Robert might change the rhythm or might change the character or add a couple of extra notes or things like that. It was my job to respond based off of that. And so we'd kind of play these games with the music. I'm thinking particularly of our first piece, which was a Bach A minor minuet. If I recall, it's something like something like that. And so we'd play that over and over, and we would change the rhythm or change the notes, or he would take one repeat or the other, and I had to guess which one he took. And um, it really taught me a strong lesson in spontaneity, because otherwise, if we're playing these pieces 1,000 times, it gets extremely boring. And if we're not careful enough, not only is it boring for us, but it becomes boring to listen to. And that's the worst thing that can happen, right? So we had to figure out how to add some more life into this music that we've played a million times. And that's where this spontaneity came in, that each time we're doing something different. Um, and ideally, it comes from great practice and not just repeating things 1,000 times, but it comes from great practice and discovery. Um, so that we're always trying new ideas and understanding the music in new ways so that we can develop these new ideas. And I think spontaneity really is at the key of what makes music fun and interesting, especially in concerts, right? I mean, I think um, that when there's spontaneity, there's not a sense that the music is rigid and calcified, but rather there's a certain flexibility and variety at all times. Um, and that comes with great practice and great discovery, and great trying of new ideas. And not all those ideas are going to work. But to me, that's what spontaneity is that something's a little bit different every time. And that comes back to the discipline leads to freedom. We need to really get into the crux of the music and figure it out so that we're able to have the freedom to be spontaneous. And I think we can also practice spontaneously, practice spontaneity and practice spontaneously. Um, I think that that's the key to keeping music interesting. Um, I'm sure you have some thoughts to add.
Yeah, yeah, a lot there to unpack, right? But this idea of mm, like practice, right? Practice is like, I feel like for most of us, certainly for me, it's something that is always evolving. And there's always a balance. As I've been a professional for a while now, and there's always this balance you need. You mentioned if it's boring for you, it can be boring for the audience. I tend to think that if it's boring for you, it's has to be also boring for the audience. Like there's no maybe about it. Like if you're bored, they're bored. And so if you're bored in the practice room, you're practicing how to be bored in performance. So you the evolution of my practice is basically like I don't allow that to happen anymore. So if there's ever something when I'm practicing, and this might not even be for a certain piece, but if there's any time I'm practicing a scale and I feel bored, that means something needs to change, and that's the spontaneity thing. Like I need to be spontaneous right now because something's I'm not focused the way I should be. I'm not into it, and so I think that's a discipline when you said it has to be practiced. I think that's kind of how it manifests. It's like the second you're bored, you need to like change something up like now. And when you practice that way, then you're able to do the same thing when you're on the stage. So I'm not sure your thoughts on that, but that's kind of when I was thinking about practice, like that's what it really is to me, being in the moment.
I love that, and it's interesting. It's this is we're kind of practicing spontaneity right now, almost. Um, I wrote a couple of things down, of course, what I wanted to talk about, but now I'm out of those things. So now, as you've kind of spontaneously talked about some things, now I've kind of come up with some things that I'd like to talk about. Shout out to my former teacher, Daniel McDonough. I want to mention one of his ideas shortly, but I think that's what creates art. And if you can call this art, I think you can, the art of speaking and sharing ideas. Um, it's all about that spontaneity. And so you made me recall a thought that's just excellent about the marriage of music and technique. Regardless of how people feel about marriages in life, I think that in music, we always want to marry music and technique together. And I know people, I know teachers, famous teachers that advocate for the opposite, that, you know, oh, you're putting music first, like you can't do that. You got to practice the technique first, get that so that you can make the music. Of course, there's some truth to that, but if you're not careful, that can really stifle your musicality. And so I had a teacher that always mentioned, well, you want to always keep musicality married to the technique. And I think that's exactly kind of what you were talking about in practices. If we're playing anything, whether it be an orchestra excerpt, a scale, a technical thing like that, or any piece of music that we like or don't like, if we're not uh, doing something interesting, for lack of a better phrase, at all times, then it's not good practice. And so if we're practicing slowly, There's always room to develop the sound. Where's the sound going? Is it going somewhere? Is it coming away from somewhere? What are the musical implications of what we're doing, even if we're practicing it and have really deconstructed it? We can't completely take out the music. Otherwise, we'll lose it when it's time to actually play it. As you said, you have to practice it in always. Um, and so I think that's super important. And one of the biggest things that I like to advocate for is the marriage of music and technique. Um, yeah.
Yeah, when I thought of also one of my old teachers, and one time I came, she was very open and a very open person. So the door's always open. You can come in, observe anytime, any lesson, anytime. But I came in one time and she was just practicing, and I just stood there and she didn't stop or anything. I just stood there and watched her for like 45 minutes, and it was fascinating to me because I couldn't quite understand what was going on at the time. But she was basically like performing. I mean, it was really like it it was like everything about it was like she was on stage. Everything about it. Like even if she had to stop, or it was basically she was just performing. And then every once in a while she would maybe stop and make a note, and then she'd check something, and then she'd performing. It was all a performance. And that really stuck with me, especially as I've gotten older, because I used to be so OCD about, I still am, that never goes away. But OCD and the too much that it like cripples you, because you get so fixated on making this or this happen in a vacuum, and then it doesn't translate in performance. And then you go to the lesson and it's like, oh, the most common thing teachers hear, oh, that sounded better in the practice room. Well, the reason is because you were not really practicing this way in general. If you're performing when you're practicing, then it's no different when you're performing for your teacher. So it you don't get that gap. And just with a few of my students, there's just this huge gap. And I tell them this, and they still want to learn the technique first and separate it from musicality. And that's their choice. There's nothing I can do about it. But someday I'm trying to like convey the message to not just my students but everybody, that like you can waste so much time when you divorce the two. Like, it's unreal. uh like the inexperienced string quartets, how they practice is the first rehearsal they start playing, and then they stop after one bar, and then they go back and they're like, oh, and then they talk for an hour, and okay, but like the more experienced quartets usually just play through everything. They perform it before they do anything else. Or the great orchestras, probably just going to run through before anything else happens. So you already have that performance experience, and then you go from that place of performance. So it's my a few more thoughts on that. You have
Yeah, those
anything
are
to
some
add
great
there,
thoughts.
Davey?
I mean, I think you touch on some really great topics. I think those are all excellent and certainly debatable. I think there's two sides to every story and every coin, and um, I could argue against myself all day long. And the truth is that there's something to be said for everything. But I think that we're really on the right track with these ideas that spontaneity is really at the key of a lot of these things, really the key of a lot of these things. And more broadly, just keeping the music alive and interesting and never calcified and never rigidly planned out every bar. I think that's where music goes to die. is with this rigidity and it's never going to be perfect, and that's not what we're aiming for. We're aiming to touch people and make great music, not showcase a perfect Paganini Caprice.
Yes.
You know, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately what you just said is like a great, it just kind of ties everything together because it's never truly about the technical perfection. That's at most just part of the equation at most. And it's the greatest virtuosity is where people don't realize how hard it is, right? So in other words, they don't no one notices the technique. That's the whole point of being great, being a master is that no one notices. It's just they only think about the music. That's the whole point. So the technique never gets in the way. So we have to always keep in mind that it's about inspiring people. It's about spreading joy and love and all these or revealing, working through sadness. I mean, music can help us deal with everything in life, and it's about connecting everyone and all of our experiences, um, both outside with everyone in the world, everyone we contact, between cultures, and also within us. So music is so powerful, and that's what we always have to keep in mind when we're playing. And spontaneity is it's absolutely. I as a music critic, I write for American Record Guide, and I cannot even. There are so many performances that are just dreadful to listen to. I mean, they're dreadful. They're so boring. Like many, many, many. And that's a sad. I don't need to call out anyone out, but there are so many recently, and sometimes names that people know. Household names. Sometimes, I mean, household within our community at least. It's like, man, they need like someone to just like take them and shake some spontaneity into them, you know. So that's my so I mean, this is why we're talking about this like uh right away. Like this is the beginning of our podcast. It's like, what are we going to talk about? Spontaneity in music. And the reason is because it's kind of a reaction. Like, don't be boring. Don't misrepresent the music. The worst blasphemy against the music is when you represent it in a way that's just not interesting and makes people want to turn you off and fall asleep. That's like the greatest disrespect to a composer. So, you have any thoughts in conclusion?
I think just that it's the same as a lot of things. If you like, let's say you're practicing a difficult passage, and it's not to your liking, then you have to change something, right? Or if you're practicing with tension, you have to move something. If it's just stuck, it's not going to be untense, if that's a word. You have to move something. If you're not doing anything with the
Or
music,
relax?
yeah. If you're not doing anything with the music, you got to do something. And so you should always be doing something. And something should always be happening. Something should be developing. Um, and spontaneity is at the core of all of that. Um, that can't say more than that.
Mm, yeah, great. Well, this has been. I mean, there's a lot more that'll come out about this. I mean, this is not like none of these topics are isolated to just like spontaneity, but we talked about practice and performance habits and different experiences we've had. And so this is not going to end here, this conversation. But would love to hear from anyone thoughts on spontaneity and how it relates to being a musician and any stories that you want to share. And I guess I think we're good to go on this one. And I hope to see you for the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.